In Camden, Maine, a 67-year-old widow was about to discover the ultimate family betrayal. What started as a routine grocery trip took a shocking turn when she came face to face with her own children selling her treasures for pennies. Eleanor Whitmore wasn't your typical retiree. For decades, she had preserved her grandmother's antique collection, known for recognizing historical value in ordinary objects. When she encountered her son orchestrating an unauthorized yard sale, she had no idea she was walking into a $300,000 deception. Eleanor's desperate fight to recover her worthless junk would expose a fortune hidden in plain sight and transform a quiet Maine town forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Eleanor Whitmore's hands shook as she lifted the grocery bags from her car's trunk, the autumn breeze off Camden's harbor, carrying the scent of salt and dying leaves. At 67, she'd grown accustomed to the small betrayals of age, the way her fingers sometimes refused to grip, how stares had become negotiations rather than simple assents, but nothing had prepared her for the betrayal waiting in her own front yard. Card tables dotted her lawn like grave markers, each one bearing pieces of her life spread out for strangers to paw through and purchase. Her grandmother Grace's china. Teacups caught the October sunlight, price tags dangling from their delicate handles like accusations. The mahogany writing desk that had anchored Grace's bedroom for 70 years sat beside the driveway, a bright orange "Sold" sticker blazoned across its leather-inlaid surface. "Michael!" Eleanor's voice cracked as she called to her eldest son, who stood near the front porch directing a middle-aged woman toward a collection of silver serving pieces. "What is this?" Her son's face flushed, but his jaw set with the stubborn determination she remembered from his childhood tantrums. "Mom, we talked about this. You've got too much stuff in that house. It's not safe." "We most certainly did not talk about this." Eleanor's grocery bag slipped from her hands, oranges rolling across the driveway as she approached the nearest table. Grace's wedding china, the set that had survived the Great Depression, World War II, and 47 Maine winters, was marked at 50 cents per piece. Sarah emerged from behind the garage, carrying another box of household items. Eleanor's daughter had always been the peacemaker, but guilt radiated from her like heat. "Mom, I'm sorry. We should have what?" Eleanor's voice rose, causing several potential buyers to glance their way. "Should have asked permission before stealing from me?" "Nobody's stealing anything." Michael's tone carried the condescending patience he usually reserved for his teenage children. "Look around, Mom. Half this stuff is collecting dust. When's the last time you used Grandma's good china? Or sat at that writing desk?" Eleanor reached for a delicate porcelain figurine, a shepherdess that Grace had bought at an estate sale in 1952. The memory came unbidden. 10-year-old Eleanor helping. Her grandmother wrap it carefully in tissue paper, Grace's weathered hands guiding hers. "Every piece tells a story, Ellie," Grace had said, her Boston accent still thick despite 50 years in Maine. "This little lady survived the Blitz in London before she made it to America. Now she's part of our story, too." "The story," Eleanor whispered, clutching the figurine to her chest. "You don't understand what you've done." Michael exchanged a look with Sarah, the kind of loaded glance that passes between siblings who've been plotting. "Mom, we're trying to help. The house is cluttered, you're living alone, and frankly, we're worried about you." "Worried about me or worried about your mortgage?" The words escaped before Eleanor could stop them, but she watched Michael's face confirm their accuracy. "How much have you already sold?" "That's not," Michael began, but Sarah interrupted. "The writing desk went for $300, and Mrs. Patterson from down the street bought the china cabinet for $250. Eleanor felt the world tilt. Grace's writing desk, where she'd penned letters to her sweetheart during the war, where she'd kept the family Bible and her mother's jewelry. Gone to strangers for the price of a decent dinner out. "You had no right." Eleanor's voice had found its strength, the librarian's authority that had once commanded silence from rowdy teenagers. No right whatsoever. "We have every right to be concerned," Michael shot back. "You're 67 years old, living alone in a house that's falling apart, surrounded by junk that serves no purpose except to make you feel connected to dead people." The casual cruelty of his words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. She watched his face, her son's face, the same stubborn chin as Grace's, and saw a stranger. When had he become so dismissive of everything she valued? "They're not dead to me," she said quietly. "Grace raised me when my parents couldn't. Every cup, every plate, every piece of furniture in that house carries her love, her story, our family's story." "Stories don't pay for groceries, Mom." Michael's voice softened slightly, but his resolve remained firm. "Or property taxes, or heat for that big house." Eleanor looked around her violated yard, taking inventory of what remained. The smaller items, Grace's jewelry box, the collection of leather-bound books, the silver hand mirror with its ornate handle. But so much was already gone. Strangers were walking away with pieces of her heart, unaware they carried decades of love and memory in their casual purchases. "Where are the lists?" Eleanor asked. "Who bought what? I need names, addresses." Sarah pulled a crumpled notebook from her pocket. "I kept track of everything, just in case." "Just in case what? In case you felt guilty later?" Eleanor's anger was clean and bright, burning away the shock and grief. "Give me that list." "Mom, be reasonable," Michael said. "Those people paid good money? Those people bought stolen property." Eleanor snatched the notebook from Sarah's reluctant hands. "And you two are going to help me get it back, or I'm calling the police." Michael laughed, but it held no humor. "The police? Mom, we're your children. We had access to the house. We were helping you clean up. No court in the world would call this theft." Eleanor studied her son's face, seeing the calculation beneath his justification. He'd thought this through, planned for her objections. The realization struck her like ice water. This wasn't impulse or misguided concern. This was deliberate. "You needed money," she said, understanding flooding through her. "Your business is failing, isn't it? The house you and Linda bought. You can't make the payments." Michael's silence was answer enough. Eleanor clutched the notebook to her chest, alongside the porcelain shepherdess. Around her, strangers continued to browse through the remnants of her life, unaware they were witnessing a family's destruction. The autumn wind picked up, scattering the price tags like fallen leaves. "Mom," Sarah said quietly, "we thought—" "You thought nothing." Eleanor's voice carried a finality that made both her children step back. "You decided that your needs mattered more than my life, my memories, my connection to the only mother I really knew." She turned toward the house, then stopped. "I want a complete list of everything sold, everyone who bought anything, and every penny you made from this betrayal. You have until tomorrow morning." As Eleanor walked toward her front door, the porcelain shepherdess still clutched in her arms, she could feel Grace's presence like a warm hand on her shoulder. Her grandmother had survived worse betrayals than this. Wars, the death of loved ones, the casual cruelties of a world that dismissed the elderly as irrelevant. But Grace had also taught her that some things were worth fighting for, that preservation of the past was a sacred duty passed from one generation to the next. As Eleanor climbed the steps to her empty house, she was already planning her counterattack. Her children had underestimated her, thinking age had made her weak and compliant. They were about to learn otherwise. Eleanor's hands trembled as she clutched her morning coffee, the porcelain shepherdess still sitting on her kitchen table where she'd placed it the night before. Sleep had been impossible. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw strangers walking away with pieces of Grace's soul. The notebook Sarah had reluctantly surrendered lay open beside her breakfast, its pages filled with casual transactions that felt like obituaries. Wooden rocking chair, $45, Mrs. Henderson, Elm Street. Silver tea service, $75. Young couple from out of town, no contact info. China cabinet, $250. Mrs. Patterson, 42 Harbor View. 3 days had passed since the yard sale. 3 days of Eleanor calling the numbers she could find, pleading with neighbors to return what they'd innocently purchased. Most had been sympathetic but firm. They'd paid good money and weren't about to give up their bargains based on family drama they didn't understand. The knock at her front door came precisely at 9 in the morning, interrupting her brooding. Inventory of losses. Eleanor approached cautiously, still raw from her children's betrayal. Through the lace curtains, she could see an elderly man with wild white hair and a tweedy jacket that had seen better decades. Mrs. Whitmore? His voice carried the refined cadence of education, tinged with something that might have been excitement. My name is Jasper McGillicuddy. I believe we need to talk about your grandmother's collection. Eleanor's grip tightened on the door handle. If you're here about buying something, I'm afraid. Oh, my dear woman, quite the opposite. Jasper held up a leather portfolio, his eyes bright with the intensity of discovery. I'm here because I've been tracking pieces of what I believe to be one of the most significant private collections of early American antiques I've encountered in 30 years. The words didn't immediately register. Eleanor stared at this stranger, who spoke of her grandmother's belongings with the reverence she'd expected from her own children. I'm sorry. What did you say? May I come in? I have photographs I think you'll find quite illuminating. Something in his manner, the careful way he held the portfolio, the genuine concern in his weathered face, made Eleanor step aside. Jasper McGillicuddy entered her front hallway with the measured appreciation of someone who understood the weight of history. Magnificent, he murmured, studying the remaining pieces that lined her walls. The craftsmanship, the patina. Mrs. Whitmore, your grandmother had an extraordinary eye. Had, Eleanor repeated bitterly. Past tense seems appropriate, considering most of it was sold 3 days ago. Jasper's face darkened. Yes, I heard. Word travels quickly in the antique community, especially when museum-quality pieces start, appearing in estate shops for a fraction of their worth. He opened his portfolio on Eleanor's dining table, spreading out photographs like a coroner displaying evidence. Each image showed one of Grace's belongings, but now they were displayed in shop windows and auction house catalogs with price tags that made Eleanor's coffee grow cold in her cup. This shaker rocking chair, Jasper pointed to a familiar piece, sold at your yard sale for $45 according to my sources. It's now in Pembroke Antiques in Freeport, priced at $1,200, and that's still undervalued. A piece of this quality and provenance should command at least $3,000 at auction. Eleanor sank into a chair, the numbers swimming before her eyes. $3,000? For Grace's old rocking chair? Mrs. Whitmore, that's not just any rocking chair. It's a signed piece by Brother Delmar Wilson from the Sabbath Day Lake Shaker community, circa 1880. There are perhaps 24 authenticated Wilson rockers in existence. Jasper's fingers moved to another photograph. And this silver tea service. Your son sold it for $75. It's Gorham sterling, part of their mythologic pattern from 1893. Complete sets in this condition are worth $15,000 to $20,000 at minimum. The room seemed to tilt around Eleanor. She gripped the table edge, watching this stranger assign values to objects she'd seen every day of her childhood. That can't be right. Grace wasn't wealthy. She bought things at estate sales, yard sales. But she had the eye, Jasper said, his voice warm with admiration. The ability to recognize quality regardless of circumstance. It's a gift, Mrs. Whitmore, and your grandmother possessed it in abundance. He pulled out more photographs, each revelation hitting Eleanor like a physical blow. The china cabinet that had dominated Grace's dining room actually assigned Herder Brothers' piece worth $30,000. The supposedly worthless porcelain scattered across her yard sale tables, Chinese export ware from the 1790s, worth hundreds per piece. "The writing desk," Eleanor whispered, remembering the orange "sold" sticker. "Please tell me." Jasper's expression grew gentle. "I'm afraid that piece has me most concerned. Based on the description I received, it sounds like a Philadelphia Chippendale desk, possibly from the Goddard Townsend School. If I'm correct about the maker's marks." He paused, studying Eleanor's pale face. "Mrs. Whitmore, that desk alone could be worth upwards of $80,000. Eleanor's world collapsed inward, every casual dismissal from Michael echoing in her memory. "How much?" she managed to ask. "All of it together?" Jasper consulted a handwritten list, his calculations precise despite the magnitude of the numbers. "Based on what I've been able to track and identify, your grandmother's collection, what was sold at that yard sale, represents somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 in current market value." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of irreversible loss. Eleanor thought of Michael's mortgage troubles, his dismissive attitude toward worthless junk. $300,000 would have solved every financial problem her family faced, but he'd thrown it away for pocket change. "They're gone, aren't they?" Eleanor's voice was barely audible. "Scattered to collectors, shipped out of state." "Some, yes," Jasper admitted. "The antique trade moves quickly, when quality pieces surface unexpectedly. But Mrs. Whitmore, not everything is lost. The legal situation is complex, but with proper documentation and perhaps some creative negotiation, recovery might be possible." Eleanor looked up at this strange man who'd appeared in her darkest hour like some elderly knight-errant. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" Jasper's smile was sad but determined. 43 years ago, my wife was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. As her mind faded, I began collecting antiques. Not for their monetary value, but because each piece carried someone's story. After she died, I opened my shop not to get rich, but to make sure these stories found the right homes. He gestured toward the photographs. "Your grandmother's collection represents decades of careful selection, love, and preservation. To see it dispersed carelessly, sold for pennies by people who couldn't recognize its worth." His voice hardened. "It's a crime against history, Mrs. Whitmore, and if you're willing to fight for it, I'd be honored to help." Eleanor stared at the photographs spread across her table, each image a testament to Grace's wisdom and her children's betrayal. But for the first time since discovering the yard sale, she felt something other than grief and rage. She felt hope. "Where do we start?" she asked, her librarian's instincts for research and organization awakening. Jasper's grin revealed the mischievous spirit beneath his scholarly exterior. "We start by making some calls, gathering documentation, and reminding certain dealers that provenance matters. Then we go shopping, but this time we're the ones doing the hunting." As Eleanor reached for the telephone, Grace's porcelain shepherdess seemed to smile at her from across the table. The fight for her family's legacy was just beginning, but she was no longer fighting alone. The Camden Police Department's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Detective Ray Bouchard's weathered face as Eleanor finished recounting her story. The photographs Jasper had brought lay spread across the metal desk like evidence from a crime scene, which Eleanor supposed they were. "Mrs. Whitmore," Ray said carefully, his pen hovering over the incident report, "I understand your frustration, but family disputes over property. They're complicated." "This isn't a dispute." Eleanor's voice carried the sharp edge she'd perfected during 40 years of silencing unruly teenagers. "This is theft. They took my possessions without permission and sold them." Ray's expression softened with the kind of practiced sympathy Eleanor had learned to distrust. "But they're your children. They had access to your home. From a legal standpoint, proving criminal intent when family members claim they were helping." "Helping themselves, you mean?" Eleanor pulled out Sarah's notebook, its pages now annotated with Jasper's value estimates. They made over $2,000 in a single morning. That's not help, that's profit. Jasper cleared his throat from the plastic chair beside Eleanor. Detective, I've been in the antique business for 3 decades. The pieces Mrs. Whitmore describes represent a collection worth at least $250,000. That elevates this beyond simple family disagreement. Ray's eyebrows rose. $250,000? Are you certain? Conservative estimate, Jasper replied. I've documented at least 47 pieces that have already surfaced in shops between here and Boston. Each one sold at the yard sale for a fraction of its worth. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Eleanor watched Ray make notes, but his reluctance was evident in every careful word he wrote. I'll need to interview your children separately, Mrs. Whitmore. Get their version of events. Their version will be that they were helping a confused old woman clean house, Eleanor said bitterly. Michael's already rehearsed his justifications. That may be, Ray said, but it's their right to present their side. In the meantime, I'd suggest documenting everything you can remember about the collection. Photographs, receipts, insurance records. Eleanor's heart sank. Grace had never photographed her treasures or kept formal records. To her, they were simply the furniture and dishes that filled her daily life, not museum pieces requiring documentation. There are no photographs, she admitted. Grace never treated them as valuable antiques. They were just home. Ray's expression grew more sympathetic, but also more pessimistic. That's going to make recovery very difficult, Mrs. Whitmore. Without proof of ownership or value. The proof is in their current locations, Jasper interrupted. I can provide documentation of where specific pieces have appeared and their authenticated values. But detective, the longer we wait, the further these items scatter. The antique trade has its own network. Word spreads quickly when quality pieces surface. Eleanor felt the walls of bureaucracy closing around her like a trap. So you're saying that because my children are family, they can steal from me with impunity? I'm saying the law requires us to prove intent to permanently deprive, Ray explained. If they believed they had permission, or if they intended to give you the proceeds. They kept the money, Eleanor stated flatly. Michael needed it for his mortgage. That sounds like intent to me. Ray made another note. I'll look into it, Mrs. Whitmore, but I want to be honest with you. Prosecution in family theft cases is rare. Most DAs won't touch them unless there's clear evidence of fraud or elder abuse. Eleanor left the police station feeling more frustrated than when she'd entered. The October air carried the bite of approaching winter, matching her mood as she and Jasper walked back to his vintage Mercedes. Don't let his pessimism discourage you, Jasper said, opening her door with old-fashioned courtesy. The legal system moves slowly, but we don't have to wait for them. What do you mean? Jasper's eyes held the glint she was beginning to recognize as his hunting instinct. I mean, we start our own investigation. Track down every piece we can identify, document their current locations, and begin the delicate process of negotiation. Their first stop was Pembroke Antiques in Freeport, where Grace's Shaker rocking chair sat in the window display like a trophy. The shop owner, a thin man with nervous hands, grew visibly uncomfortable when Jasper introduced Eleanor. Look, I paid fair market value for that piece, he insisted. $45 might seem low to you now, but that's what it was priced at. By someone who had no right to sell it, Eleanor said. That chair belongs to me. Lady, I got bills to pay. I can't just give back merchandise because you're having second thoughts about a family sale. Jasper stepped forward, his voice carrying professorial authority. Mr. Pembroke, you're a respected dealer. I'm sure you wouldn't want word spreading that you knowingly handle stolen goods. The man's face reddened. Stolen? Now wait just a minute. Mrs. Whitmore never authorized that sale, Jasper continued smoothly. Her children acted without permission. That makes every transaction fraudulent. Eleanor watched the dealer's confidence crack. I didn't know. The young man said he was cleaning out his mother's house, said she was moving to a retirement home. Another lie, Eleanor said, feeling anger burn through her grief. I'm not going anywhere, and Michael knew it. The negotiation took 2 hours, but Eleanor finally walked out with Grace's rocking chair, having paid the dealer his original $45 plus a handling fee that made her teeth clench. It was extortion, but it was also victory. 1 down, Jasper said as they loaded the chair into his car. 46 to go. Their next stop yielded less success. The antique shop in Brunswick had already sold Grace's silver tea service to a private collector in Boston. The shop owner provided only a phone number, which led to an answering machine and no return call. They move fast once they recognize value, Jasper explained as they drove back toward Camden. The serious collectors have networks, relationships. A piece can go from Maine to Manhattan in 24 hours. Eleanor stared out the window at the familiar coastline, feeling the magnitude of her loss settling like stones in her chest. How many will we actually recover? Honestly, maybe half if we're persistent and lucky. But Eleanor. Jasper's use of her first name felt intimate, comforting. Sometimes the fight matters more than the outcome. Your grandmother would be proud of what you're doing. As they pulled into Eleanor's driveway, she noticed Michael's truck parked on the street. Her son sat on her front steps, his face grim with the weight of impending confrontation. Round 2, Eleanor murmured, straightening her shoulders as she prepared for battle. Eleanor's Victorian house felt different with Jasper's, presence filling the spaces that had echoed with loneliness since Harold's death. Maps of Maine and New Hampshire spread across her dining table like battle plans, marked with red pins indicating shops where Grace's treasures had surfaced, and green pins showing successful recoveries. 3 pieces back, Jasper announced, updating their progress chart with the satisfaction of a general marking conquered territory. The rocking chair, the pewter candlesticks from that dealer in Bath, and Grace's sewing box from the estate sale in Kennebunkport. Eleanor ran her fingers along the familiar wood of the sewing box, remembering summer afternoons watching Grace's nimble hands repair torn clothing with threads stored in its tiny compartments. Each recovered piece felt like welcoming home, a kidnapped family member. That leaves 44 still missing, Eleanor said, though the growing pile of recoveries in her living room had begun to restore something she'd thought lost forever: hope. Today we tackle the difficult ones, Jasper said, consulting his notes. There's a dealer in Portsmouth who claims he sold your grandmother's china set to a collector in Connecticut, and I've tracked the writing desk to Harrison's Fine Antiques in Concord. Eleanor's stomach clenched at the mention of Grace's desk. After 3 weeks of detective work, Jasper's suspicions about its value had only grown. Research had revealed similar pieces selling at Sotheby's for astronomical sums, making the $300 Michael had received feel like selling the Mona Lisa for the price of a postcard. The drive to Portsmouth took them along Route 1, past the familiar landscape of rocky coastline and salt marshes that had defined Eleanor's entire life. Jasper drove with the careful precision of his generation, hands at 10 and 2, while Eleanor found herself studying his profile, the way his white hair caught the autumn sunlight, the gentle competence of his manner. "Tell me about your wife," she said, surprising herself with the personal question. Jasper's hands tightened slightly on the steering wheel. "Margaret. We met at a faculty mixer when I was teaching at Bowdoin. She was the art history professor who intimidated half the faculty with her brilliance." His smile carried decades of love and loss. She collected depression glass, claimed each piece held the echo of the hands that had touched it. I thought it was romantic nonsense until I started collecting myself after. After she died? After I lost her to the disease, but before I lost her entirely. Jasper's voice grew quiet. Alzheimer's takes people by degrees, Eleanor. The collecting helped me hold on to something when everything else was slipping away. Eleanor understood completely. Grace's belongings had served the same purpose, tangible connections to love that death couldn't completely sever. Is that why you're helping me? Because you understand? Partly, Jasper admitted, but also because watching your children dismiss your grandmother's legacy as worthless junk. It's a betrayal of something sacred. The antique shop in Portsmouth occupied a converted sea captain's mansion, its rooms filled with the kind of carefully curated collection that separated serious dealers from weekend hobbyists. The owner, Mrs. Chen, greeted them with the wariness of someone who'd already received several uncomfortable phone calls. I've told you before, Mr. McGillicuddy, the china set was sold legitimately. I have documentation. Documentation from someone who had no legal right to sell, Eleanor interjected. My son misrepresented his authority. Mrs. Chen's expression softened as she studied Eleanor's face. You're the grandmother? The woman whose collection was dispersed? I'm the owner whose property was stolen, Eleanor corrected, her librarian's precision intact despite her emotions. The negotiation stretched over 2 hours, and 3 cups of tea served in china that wasn't nearly as fine as Grace's. Mrs. Chen had sold the set to a collector in Hartford for $8,000, a massive markup from the $75 Michael had received, but still below the set's true value according to Jasper's research. The collector won't sell, Mrs. Chen finally admitted. He's been hunting for a complete Spode set in this pattern for 15 years, but… She hesitated, studying Eleanor's determined face. There's an auction house in Boston. Estate pieces sometimes surface there from collectors' inheritances. You might watch their catalogs. Eleanor left Portsmouth empty-handed but armed with information, the collector's name, the auction house contacts, and a growing understanding of how the antique world operated. Money talked, but so did persistence and the moral weight of righteous indignation. Their next stop in Concord proved more successful. Harrison's Fine Antiques occupied a restored colonial building where Grace's writing desk commanded a place of honor in the front window. The price tag made Eleanor's vision blur. $45,000. $45,000, she whispered to Jasper. Michael sold it for $300. The confrontation with Mr. Harrison revealed new depths to her son's deception. Michael hadn't simply misrepresented his ownership. He'd provided forged documentation claiming the desk had been left to him specifically in Grace's will. This is fraud, Eleanor said, staring at the fake papers. Not family dispute, actual criminal fraud. Harrison, a distinguished man in his 60s, looked genuinely disturbed. I had no idea. The documentation seemed legitimate, and the young man knew details about the piece's history. Details he learned sitting at that desk as a child, Eleanor said bitterly, using my grandmother's stories to legitimize his theft. The legal implications were serious enough that Harrison agreed to return the desk for the $300 he'd paid, plus his restoration costs. As they loaded the precious piece into Jasper's car, Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. Not just relief, but a fierce satisfaction that surprised her with its intensity. Your grandmother would be proud, Jasper said, echoing his earlier sentiment. Grace was tougher than anyone realized, Eleanor replied, running her hand along the desk's familiar surface. She survived the depression by being smart, stubborn, and willing to fight for what mattered. Back in Camden, as they carried the desk into Eleanor's house, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the grief-stricken victim who'd discovered the yard sale 3 weeks ago. This woman had steel in her spine and purpose in her eyes. The hunt was far from over, but Eleanor Whitmore was no longer just recovering stolen property. She was reclaiming herself. The damning evidence lay spread across the mahogany surface of Grace's recovered writing desk like accusations waiting to be voiced. Eleanor stared at the forged documentation Michael had used to sell the desk, her hands trembling with a rage that had been building for 4 weeks. The fake signatures, the altered dates, the deliberate lies. This wasn't desperation or misguided help. This was calculated fraud. Mrs. Whitmore? Detective Bouchard's voice crackled through her phone speaker. I've reviewed the documents. You faxed over. This changes things significantly. Fraud is a felony, regardless of family relationships. Eleanor felt vindicated but hollow. What happens now? I need to bring your son in for questioning. The forged documentation establishes clear criminal intent. After hanging up, Eleanor sat in Grace's chair, surrounded by the growing collection of recovered pieces. 23 items now filled her living room, less than half of what had been stolen. But each recovery felt like a small victory against the forces that had tried to erase her family's history. The knock at her door came precisely at noon. Eleanor opened it to find Michael standing on her porch, his face haggard with sleepless nights and mounting desperation. Behind him, Sarah emerged from a rental car, having flown in from California, after Eleanor's phone call about the fraud. "Mom, we need to talk," Michael said, his voice stripped of its earlier defiance. "Yes, we do." Eleanor stepped aside, letting them enter. Both her children stopped short at the sight of the recovered antiques filling the living room. "Jesus, Mom," Sarah whispered. "Where did all this come from?" "I bought it back," Eleanor said simply. "Piece by piece, from the dealers you sold it to. For considerably more than the pennies you accepted, I might add." Michael's face flushed. "You can't just— People paid good money for those things. You can't force them to sell back." "I didn't force anyone," Eleanor replied, her voice deadly calm. "I negotiated. I explained the situation. Most dealers, when they understand they've purchased stolen goods, prefer to resolve matters quietly." "Stolen goods?" Michael's voice cracked. "Mom, I had every right—" "You forged documents." Eleanor pulled out the fake papers Harrison had provided. "You created false documentation claiming Grace left the writing desk specifically to you. That's not family dispute, Michael. That's fraud." The color drained from Michael's face as he stared at the evidence. Sarah gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. "Michael, tell me you didn't," Sarah pleaded. The dealer wanted proof of ownership. I made it look official." "You committed a felony," Eleanor stated. "Detective Bouchard has opened a criminal investigation." The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Michael slumped into Grace's rocking chair, his head in his hands. "I was desperate, Mom. The bank was going to foreclose. Linda was threatening to leave. I thought they were just old things that meant nothing to anyone." "Meant nothing?" Eleanor's voice rose. "That desk is worth $45,000, Michael. 45,000. You sold it for 300 and forged documents to do it." Sarah's face had gone pale. 45. "Michael, what have you done?" "You knew," Eleanor said, turning to her daughter. "You kept records of everything sold. You knew exactly what was happening." "I thought we were helping," Sarah said, weakly. "You seemed so overwhelmed after Dad died, and the house was so full of stuff." "Stuff." Eleanor tasted the bitter word. "Is that what you call a $250,000 collection of museum-quality antiques?" Both her children stared at her in stunned silence. "$250,000?" Michael whispered. "Conservative estimate," Eleanor replied. "Grace wasn't a confused old woman collecting junk, Michael. She was a brilliant woman with an eye for quality, who spent 70 years building something extraordinary. And you destroyed it in a single morning for pocket change." The front door opened without warning, and Tommy Whitmore walked in, his teenage swagger faltering as he took in the tense scene. "Dad? What's going on? Why is everyone—" He stopped, staring at the antiques filling the room. "Whoa, Grandma," Ellie, where did all this cool stuff come from? It came from your father's conscience, Eleanor said sharply. He's been returning what he stole from me. Tommy's eyes widened. Stole? Dad, you said you were helping Grandma clean out junk. It wasn't junk, Michael said quietly, his voice broken. I was wrong. About everything. The teenager moved closer to examine a silver serving tray, his interest genuine despite his usual dismissal of old stuff. This is actually pretty awesome. Look at the detail in the engraving. Is this real silver? Gorham sterling, Eleanor said, watching her great-grandson with surprise. From 1893. Your great-great-grandmother Grace bought it at an estate sale in 1952 for $12. What's it worth now? Tommy asked, running his finger along the intricate pattern. About $3,000. Your father sold it for $15. Tommy's head snapped toward Michael, his teenage judgment swift and merciless. Dad, that's messed up. Like really messed up. Tommy, Michael began, but his son interrupted. No, Dad, this is seriously uncool. You stole from Grandma. Ellie? And now she's having to buy back her own stuff? The boy's voice carried the moral clarity that comes before life teaches compromise. That's like the definition of being a terrible person. Michael flinched as if struck. I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself, Tommy said, his young voice cutting through years of adult rationalization. To Grandma's money. Eleanor watched her great-grandson examine piece after piece with growing fascination, asking questions about their origins and history. Here was someone who might understand what Grace had tried to preserve. Not just objects, but stories, connections to a past worth remembering. Tommy, she said carefully, would you like to hear about your great-great-grandmother Grace? About how she collected these pieces? The boy looked up, his interest genuine. Yeah, actually, this stuff is way cooler than Dad said it was. Sarah was crying now, quiet tears of guilt and recognition. Mom, I'm so sorry. We didn't know. We never meant. But you did know, Eleanor interrupted. You knew I loved these things. You knew they connected me to Grace, to our family's history. You just decided your judgment mattered more than mine. Michael raised his head, his eyes red with shame and desperation. What do you want from me, Mom? I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Eleanor studied her eldest son, seeing past his failures to the little boy who used to sit at Grace's feet, listening to stories about each treasure in the collection. That child was still there, buried under financial pressure and adult cynicism. I want you to help me recover what's left, she said finally. Every dealer you contacted, every piece you sold, I want complete information, and I want you to face the consequences of what you've done. The police investigation? Michael asked quietly. Eleanor looked at her broken family, then at Tommy's eager face as he examined Grace's silver. That depends on how seriously you take making amends. The battle lines were drawn, but for the first time since the yard sale, Eleanor sensed the possibility of something beyond mere recovery, redemption perhaps for all of them. The silence in Eleanor's living room stretched taut as a violin string, until Tommy's voice cut through the tension with the casual brutality of teenage honesty. So basically, Dad, you're a criminal and Grandma Ellie has to fix your mess. Looked up from examining a delicate porcelain vase, his expression carrying the kind of moral clarity that adults spend years learning to compromise away. That's pretty messed up. Michael's face crumpled further, but Eleanor found herself studying her great-grandson with new interest. While his father and aunt struggled with guilt and justification, Tommy moved through the recovered collection. With genuine curiosity, his fingers careful on surfaces his father had dismissed as worthless. Tommy, Eleanor said carefully, what do you know about computers, about finding things online? The teenager's eyes lit up, the first genuine spark of enthusiasm Eleanor had seen from him in years of dutiful holiday visits. Are you kidding? I can find anything online. Why? Because, Eleanor said, glancing meaningfully at Jasper, who had arrived during the family confrontation and now sat quietly observing. We need to track down about 20 more pieces, and the antique world is more connected than I realized. Over the next hour, while Michael and Sarah grappled with their guilt, Tommy transformed Eleanor's kitchen table into a command center. His laptop hummed as he pulled up auction sites, antique dealer networks, and collector forums with the effortless navigation of his generation. Okay, this is actually pretty cool, Tommy said, his excitement building as he worked. Look, there are databases that track sales of specific pieces, and social media groups where collectors show off their finds. If great-great-grandma Grace's stuff is really as valuable as you say, it will have attracted attention, Jasper finished, leaning over the boy's shoulder to study the screen. Quality pieces create ripples in the community. Tommy's fingers flew across the keyboard with a speed that made Eleanor dizzy. Found something. Look at this Facebook group, New England Antique Finds. Some guy posted pictures of a tea set he bought at an estate sale in Maine last month. Says he got it for a steal. Eleanor's heart lurched as she recognized Grace's second-best china. Not the valuable Spode set, but still precious for its memories. That's Grace's everyday set. She served me cocoa in those cups every winter evening. The post has 37 comments, Tommy continued, scrolling through responses. Half of them are people saying the guy got lucky, the other half are asking where he found it. And look, he pointed to a comment thread. Someone's offering to buy it from him for $2,000. 2,000? Sarah's voice was small, ashamed. We sold that for $25. Eleanor felt the familiar burn of anger, but it was joined now by something else, a growing sense of tactical advantage. Tommy, can you find out who this person is? The buyer? Already on it. The teenager's confidence was infectious. Cross-referencing the profile with public records and... Got him. James Chen lives in Burlington, Vermont, works for an insurance company, collects American ceramics. Jasper's eyebrows rose. Chen? Related to Mrs. Chen from the Portsmouth shop? Could be, Tommy said, still typing. But here's the interesting part. He posted in 3 different collector groups about this find, which means everyone in the antique community knows about it, Eleanor finished, understanding dawning. Exactly. And if they know about the tea set, they're probably talking about the other pieces too. Tommy's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. Want me to see what else I can find? For the next 2 hours, Tommy worked with the focused intensity Eleanor recognized from her own research days. He mapped a network of sales, posts, and collector chatter that painted a picture of Grace's collection scattering across New England like seeds on the wind. But not all the news was discouraging. Some pieces had attracted enough attention to become traceable, their new owners eager to share their good fortune online. Others had landed with dealers who, Tommy discovered, had established relationships and reputations to maintain. This is actually kind of awesome, Tommy said, pulling up another auction listing. It's like detective work, but with really old stuff that's actually worth something. Sarah, who had been silent since her earlier breakdown, finally spoke up. Mom, I kept more detailed records than what I gave you before. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I felt guilty about the whole thing, so I wrote down everything. Every person who bought something, every conversation Michael had with dealers. Eleanor turned to her daughter, seeing something she hadn't expected. Not just guilt, but genuine remorse and a desire to make amends. You have more information? Names, addresses, phone numbers when people gave them, even some descriptions. Of cars for people who paid cash and didn't leave contact info. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through notes. I thought maybe if things went wrong, we'd need to contact people. This is huge, Tommy said, looking up from his laptop. With detailed records and online tracking, we can probably locate most of the missing pieces. Jasper nodded approvingly. The boy's right. The antique community is smaller than people realize, and quality pieces leave trails. Between Sarah's records and Tommy's digital skills, we might actually get most of it back, Eleanor finished, feeling hope flutter in her chest like a bird testing its wings. A knock at the door interrupted their planning session. Eleanor opened it to find a young woman in a professional blazer, her hair pulled back severely and her expression serious. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Amanda Cross from Heritage Appraisals. I believe we need to talk about your grandmother's collection. Eleanor's blood chilled. If you're here to claim ownership of something— Quite the opposite, Amanda interrupted, her voice carrying an urgency that made Eleanor step aside. I'm the appraiser who first identified several pieces from your collection when they appeared in shops around Maine. I've been tracking their dispersal, and I think you need to know. Some very serious collectors have taken notice. Amanda entered the house, her eyes immediately cataloging the recovered pieces with professional precision. Mrs. Whitmore, your family's collection isn't just valuable, it's historically significant, and word has reached collectors who don't care about legal ownership. What do you mean? Eleanor asked, though she suspected she didn't want to know the answer. I mean, there's a collector in Boston who's already acquired 3 of your pieces, through private sales. He's offering premium prices to anyone who can deliver the rest of the collection. Amanda's voice was grim. No questions asked about provenance. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Eleanor's quest to recover her family's treasures had attracted dangerous attention. However, Amanda continued, I have a proposition that might help us all. Eleanor looked around at her unlikely team, an eccentric antique dealer, a guilt-ridden daughter, a tech-savvy teenager, and now a professional appraiser with her own agenda. It wasn't the family she'd expected to fight alongside, but it might be exactly what she needed. I'm listening, Eleanor said, settling into Grace's rocking chair with the determined air of a general preparing for the final battle. The mahogany conference table at Bridgeway Auction House gleamed under harsh fluorescent lights as Eleanor faced down 3 men in expensive suits who looked at her like she was an inconvenient obstacle to profit. The auction catalog lay open. Between them, Grace's Civil War-era locket displayed in full-color photography on page 47, with an estimated value of $15,000 to $25,000. Mrs. Whitmore, said Director Charles Hartwell, his voice carrying the practiced condescension of someone accustomed to dismissing elderly women's concerns, I understand your emotional attachment to this piece, but we have clear documentation of legitimate purchase. Eleanor's hands remained steady as she slid Amanda Cross's authentication report across the table. What you have is documentation of fraudulent sale. My son had no legal right to sell this locket, as these bank records clearly show. It was never part of any estate settlement. Amanda sat beside Eleanor, her professional composure masking the nervous energy Eleanor could sense thrumming beneath. Taking on Bridgeway required courage. The auction house's reputation could make or break careers in the antique world. The authentication is thorough, Amanda said, her voice carrying newfound authority. This locket contains previously unknown daguerreotypes of Union soldiers, making it not just valuable, but historically significant. Mrs. Whitmore's grandmother acquired it legitimately in 1948, and it has remained in family hands until it was stolen last month. Hartwell's jaw tightened. Stolen is a strong word, Miss Cross. Family disputes over property rarely constitute. Fraud constitutes theft regardless of family relationships, interrupted a new voice from the doorway. Detective Bouchard entered, his police credentials giving weight to his words. Mr. Hartwell, this auction house is about to sell documented stolen property. That makes you an accessory. Eleanor watched Hartwell's confidence crack as he realized this wasn't just an emotional grandmother making unreasonable demands. Ray's presence transformed their moral argument into a legal threat that could destroy the auction house's reputation. Detective, Hartwell said carefully, we've done our due diligence. The consignor provided appropriate documentation. Forged. Documentation, Eleanor interjected, producing the fake papers Michael had used with other dealers. My son has confessed to fraud. These signatures were fabricated, the dates altered. Your due diligence accepted obviously falsified documents. Tommy chose that moment to burst through the conference room door, his laptop clutched against his chest and excitement making his voice crack. Grandma Ellie, I found it! The proof you needed! Eleanor's heart jumped, but she maintained her composure. Tommy, what did you find? The blog post. Tommy's fingers flew over his keyboard as he pulled up a website. Great-great-grandma. Grace wrote about this locket on a local history blog in 2019. Look, she posted pictures and told the whole story about buying it from a Civil War veteran's estate sale. The room fell silent as Tommy turned his laptop screen toward the auction house officials. Grace's familiar handwriting, transcribed into digital format, described acquiring the locket and discovering the hidden daguerreotypes inside. The blog post was dated, authenticated, and provided unshakable proof of Grace's ownership. She even mentions you, Grandma Ellie, Tommy continued, scrolling down. Says she's leaving it to her granddaughter Eleanor because you're the one who truly understands the importance of preserving family history. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but kept her voice steady. Mr. Hartwell, you now have irrefutable proof that this locket belongs to me. Proceeding with the auction would be knowing participation in theft. Hartwell exchanged glances with his colleagues, calculation replacing arrogance in his expression. Even if we accept your ownership claim, Mrs. Whitmore, we have contractual obligations to our consignor. Your consignor is a confessed criminal, Ray interrupted. Any contract based on fraudulent documentation is void. Amanda leaned forward, her voice carrying the authority of expertise. Charles, let's be practical. The media attention alone would be devastating. Prestigious auction house knowingly sells stolen Civil War artifacts isn't the kind of headline that builds collector confidence. Eleanor saw the moment Hartwell realized he was cornered. The auction house's reputation depended on discretion and legitimacy. Scandal would cost them far more than one lot's commission. What exactly are you proposing? Hartwell asked, his tone shifting from confrontational to negotiative. Simple, Eleanor said, feeling Grace's spirit strengthen her voice. You return the locket to its rightful owner and remove it from the auction. In exchange, we handle this matter quietly, without involving the media or filing formal complaints against your authentication procedures. And if we refuse? Ray's smile held no warmth. Then Mrs. Whitmore holds a press conference this afternoon about how a family's priceless Civil War artifacts were stolen and nearly sold by an auction house that failed to verify basic ownership documents. Tommy looked up from his laptop with the deadly innocence of his generation. I could totally live stream the whole thing. My TikTok about this already has like 50,000 views. Eleanor blinked. Your what has what? I've been documenting the whole treasure hunt, Tommy explained. People love this story. The mean family members, the stolen antiques, the badass grandmother fighting back. You're kind of internet famous now. The color drained from Hartwell's face as he realized the situation had spiraled beyond his control. A social media sensation could destroy their reputation overnight. Fine, he said through gritted teeth. We'll remove the lot from today's auction. But I want a signed agreement that this matter ends here. Eleanor felt victory surge through her veins, but she wasn't finished. There's one more thing. I want the contact information for everyone who inquired about the locket. If word has spread about its availability, I need to know who else might be pursuing pieces from my collection. The negotiations took another hour, but Eleanor walked out of Bridgeway Auction House carrying Grace's locket in a velvet jewelry box, feeling more powerful than she had in years. The weight of the small, gold case in her hands represented more than recovered property. It was proof that she could fight institutions and win. "That was magnificent," Amanda said as they stood outside the auction house. "You faced down one of the most powerful auction houses in New England and made them back down." "We faced them down," Eleanor corrected, looking around at her unlikely team. "I couldn't have done this alone." Tommy grinned, still high on adrenaline. "Can we do this again? Because that was way cooler than any video game." Ray chuckled, but his expression grew serious. "Mrs. Whitmore, Amanda was right about dangerous collectors. Your victory here might attract unwanted attention. Some people don't care about legal ownership when they want something badly enough." Eleanor opened the locket, studying the faded daguerreotypes of young soldiers who had died more than a century ago. Grace had preserved their memory, just as she'd preserved so many other fragments of the past. "Let them come," Eleanor said, feeling Grace's fierce protectiveness flow through her. "I've learned I'm tougher than anyone realized, including myself." As they walked toward Jasper's car, Eleanor realized her quest had transformed from simple recovery to something much larger. She wasn't just reclaiming stolen property. She was defending the principle that some things were worth fighting for, regardless of age or odds. The war for Grace's legacy was far from over, but Eleanor Whitmore had just won her most important battle. Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, watching the third unmarked van this week crawl past her Victorian home. The driver slowed deliberately, his passenger raising what looked suspiciously like a camera toward her windows. Ever since the auction house incident made the Portland Press-Herald's front page, local widow battles big auction house over family heirlooms, her quiet street had become a parade route for curiosity seekers and worse. The coffee in her hands had gone cold an hour ago, but she barely noticed. Sleep had become elusive since her victory at Pembroke and Associates 3 weeks prior. What should have been a triumphant moment, recovering Grace's Civil War locket and exposing the auction house's questionable practices, had instead opened a hornet's nest of complications she'd never anticipated. Her answering machine blinked, with 17 new messages. She'd stopped listening to them after the 5th threatening call from collectors questioning her ownership of other recovered pieces. The legal victory that had felt so sweet in the moment now tasted bitter as winter. Wind. The front doorbell chimed, its familiar melody now making Eleanor's shoulders tense rather than welcoming visitors. Through the lace curtains, she could see Detective Ray Bouchard's unmarked sedan in her driveway, a sight that had become disturbingly routine. "Morning, Eleanor," Ray said when she opened the door. His kind eyes held the tired concern of someone who'd been dealing with the fallout of her case for weeks. "How are you holding up?" "Like a woman who's discovered that doing the right thing makes you a target," Eleanor replied, stepping aside to let him in. "Coffee?" "Please." Ray settled into Harold's old chair at the kitchen table, a gesture that had become comfortable between them. "I've got updates, and I'm afraid not all of them are good news." Eleanor poured fresh coffee, her hands steadier than they'd been in days. Jasper's morning visit had helped. His gentle presence and encyclopedic knowledge of antique law had become her anchor in the storm of controversy surrounding her case. "The harassment calls?" she asked, sitting across from Ray. "We've traced most of them to a consortium of dealers who've been working together to discredit your ownership claims. Nothing overtly illegal, but they're definitely coordinating their efforts." Ray pulled out a small notebook. "The real problem is overseas. 3 of your grandmother's pieces that we haven't recovered yet. They've been shipped to private collectors in Europe. Once they're out of the country, they're gone forever," Eleanor finished. The weight of it settled on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Grace's China shepherdess, the one that had watched over the mantle for 60 years. The silver tea service that had been a wedding gift to Eleanor's great-grandparents. The hand-painted music box that had played the same lullaby for 4 generations of babies. "There's something else," Ray continued, his voice gentler. "Your son Michael's situation has gotten worse." Eleanor's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down. Despite everything Michael had done, despite the betrayal that still felt like an open wound, he was still her son. The publicity surrounding the case had been brutal for him, local newspapers painting him as the ungrateful son who'd stolen from his elderly mother. How much worse? His business partner, Dave Henderson, pulled out of their construction company yesterday, cited reputational concerns and the negative publicity affecting their ability to get new contracts. Ray's expression was carefully neutral. Michael's facing bankruptcy now. His wife Lisa called my office this morning, asking if there were any options for making this go away quietly. The irony was bitter as burnt coffee. Michael had sold Grace's treasures to save his business, and now his actions to get quick cash had destroyed that same business entirely. Eleanor should have felt vindicated. Instead, she felt hollow. He brought this on himself, she said, but the words lacked conviction. Yes, he did, but his kids didn't. Tommy's been getting grief at school. Kids calling his father a thief. Lisa's talking about moving them out of state, starting over somewhere the family name isn't associated with. Scandal. Eleanor closed her eyes, seeing Tommy's face as it had been 3 weeks ago when he'd helped her research the Lockett's history online. The boy had been fascinated by the family's stories, asking questions about his great-great-grandmother Grace, with the kind of hunger for connection that Michael had never shown. Now, Tommy was paying the price for his father's failures. The phone rang, startling them both. Eleanor glanced at the caller ID and felt her stomach clench. It's Sarah. She'd barely spoken to her daughter since the family confrontation at Michael's house. Sarah had returned to California the next day, her farewell stiff and formal, promising to think about everything, but offering no real support or understanding. "Mom?" Sarah's voice sounded strained, exhausted. "I've been reading about what's happening back there. The newspaper articles, the harassment. Mom, I'm so sorry." Eleanor gripped the phone tighter. "Are you?" "Yes. God, yes. I've been thinking about what you said, about how we never asked what you wanted, what you needed. I've been talking to a therapist here, trying to understand how we got to this point." Sarah's voice cracked. "I keep thinking about Grandma Grace, about how disappointed she'd be in Michael and me." The mention of Grace brought tears. Eleanor had been holding back for weeks. She'd be disappointed in the choices you made, but she'd still love you, just like I do. "I don't deserve that," Sarah whispered, "but I want to try to make things right. I've been saving money. I can help. Recover some of the pieces that are still out there, and I want to come home. Really come home this time, not just for a weekend." Ray caught Eleanor's eye and gestured toward the door, giving her privacy for the family conversation. Eleanor nodded gratefully as he slipped out, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of how complicated her life had become. "What about your job? The kids?" "I can transfer to Maine Medical Center. They've been wanting experienced pediatric nurses. And the kids need to know their grandmother better, need to understand where they come from." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "I want them to hear Grace's stories, to understand why those old things matter." Eleanor sank into her chair, overwhelmed by the possibility of reconciliation she'd stopped hoping for. "And Michael?" "Michael's his own problem to solve. But Mom, I think he's starting to understand what he's done. Really understand. The business failing, the community turning against him, watching Tommy get hurt, it's broken something in him. He called me last night, crying. Actually crying, like when we were kids and he'd done something really wrong." Through the window, Eleanor could see another car slowing in front of her house. This time it was Jasper's well-maintained Buick, and she felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. He emerged carrying what looked like a file folder and a small wrapped package, probably another piece of documentation to support their ongoing recovery efforts. and something sweet from the bakery because he'd noticed she'd been eating poorly. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest." "Anything, Mom." "Do you really understand why those things mattered to me? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" There was a long pause. Eleanor could hear the sounds of Sarah's household in the background, children playing, a television murmuring, the ordinary domestic symphony of a busy family. "I'm starting to," Sarah said finally. "I found some of Dad's old things last week. His Purple Heart, some letters he wrote to you during his deployment, his father's watch. I was going to donate them to Goodwill because they were just taking up space in the closet." Her voice grew thick. "But then I sat down and read the letters, and I could hear his voice in them. Young Dad, scared and missing home and dreaming about the life you'd build together. And I realized that's what you were trying to tell us about Grace's things. They weren't just objects, they were voices." Eleanor wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Jasper was walking up the front path now, moving with the careful dignity of a man who understood that some moments required patience. "When can you come home?" Eleanor asked. 2 weeks. I need to arrange coverage for my patients and get the kids enrolled in school here. Mom, there's something else. I want to help you turn Grace's collection into something permanent. A proper display, maybe, or a small museum. Something that honors her memory and keeps the family stories alive. Eleanor thought of Grace's locket, now safely back in its place of honor on her dresser. Inside were the photographs that had started everything. Her great-great-grandmother's young face looking out across more than a century, connecting past to present with the thin silver chain of memory. "I'd like that," Eleanor said. Grace would have liked that, too. After they hung up, Eleanor sat in the sudden quiet of her kitchen. The harassment calls would continue. The missing pieces might never be recovered. Michael's path to redemption remained uncertain, complicated by pride and the wreckage of his choices. But Sarah was coming home. Tommy would learn his family's stories, and Grace's collection, what remained of it, would have a future beyond Eleanor's lifetime. Jasper knocked softly at the door, his timing impeccable as always. When she let him in, he took one look at her face and set down his folder to wrap her in a gentle embrace. "Good news or bad?" he asked. "Both," Eleanor replied, leaning into his warmth. "Always both." He pulled back to study her face, his own eyes bright with the kind of understanding that had made him such an unexpected gift in her life. "But more good than bad this time?" Eleanor thought of Sarah's voice, thick with tears and determination, of Tommy's fascination with his family's history, of Grace's locket, home where it belonged. "More good than bad," she agreed. For the first time in a long while, more good than bad. Outside, another car cruised slowly past, its occupants craning their necks to get a glimpse of the house where the famous antique battle had begun. But for once, Eleanor didn't feel like hiding. Let them look. Let them wonder. This was her home. Grace's home. And no amount of controversy or harassment could change the fundamental truth that some things were worth fighting for. The price of victory was high, but it wasn't higher than the cost of surrender would have been. 6 months had passed since Eleanor first discovered her life scattered across card tables on her front lawn. Now, sitting in Grace's restored parlor, she watched her family file in for what Sarah had carefully orchestrated as a healing conversation. The October light streaming through the lace curtains felt different somehow. Softer, more forgiving, than the harsh summer sun that had illuminated that devastating yard sale. Tommy entered first, carrying a laptop bag and wearing the serious expression of someone who'd grown up considerably in half a year. Behind him came Michael, his face gaunt from months of stress and soul-searching. The construction business was gone, the house in foreclosure proceedings. But something in his posture suggested a man who'd finally stopped running from the consequences of his choices. Sarah arrived last, having driven up from her new apartment in Portland where she'd been working at Maine Medical Center for the past month. Her 3 children were spending the weekend with their father in California, an arrangement that spoke to how seriously she was taking this attempt at rebuilding her relationship with Eleanor. Eleanor had prepared for this moment by arranging Grace's recovered treasures throughout the room. The writing desk, successfully negotiated back from a dealer in New Hampshire, sat in its proper place by the window. The china cabinet, returned by the young couple who'd been horrified to learn of its true origins, once again displayed 5 generations of carefully preserved dishes. Not everything had come home. Too many pieces remained scattered to collectors across the globe. But enough had been recovered to make the room feel whole again. Jasper moved quietly in the kitchen, preparing tea in Grace's restored silver service. His presence had become such a natural part of Eleanor's life that including him in this family reckoning felt not just appropriate, but necessary. He'd earned his place through months of patient support and expertise, helping her navigate both the practical challenges of recovery and the emotional minefield of family betrayal. "Mom," Michael began, his voice hoarse with the weight of words he'd been practicing for weeks. "I need to start by saying something I should have said 6 months ago. I was wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. And I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover what I did to you." Eleanor studied her eldest son's face, noting the lines that hadn't been there before, the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. The confident contractor who'd dismissed her treasures as junk had been replaced by a man who'd lost everything and was slowly learning what actually mattered. "I've been seeing a counselor," Michael continued, "trying to understand how I became someone who could steal from his own mother and call it helping. Dr. Martinez says I was so focused on solving what I saw as your problems that I never stopped to consider what you actually wanted or needed." "You saw me as a problem to be managed," Eleanor said quietly, "not as a person to be respected." Michael's face crumpled slightly. "Yes, and that's on me. Not the financial stress, not the pressure from Lisa, not any of the excuses I've been telling myself. That's on me and the way I'd trained myself to see you as less capable than you are." Tommy shifted in his chair, pulling out his laptop. "Dad, show her the project first, the thing we've been working on." "Actually," Michael said, reaching into a folder at his feet, "I want to show Mom something else first." He pulled out a stack of architectural drawings, his hands steadier, now as he focused on familiar territory. "I've been using my time, since I don't have a business to run anymore, to design something. For you. For Grace." Eleanor accepted the drawings, recognizing Michael's careful draftsmanship immediately. The plans showed her Victorian home, but with thoughtful modifications. A climate-controlled display room in what had been the formal dining room, proper lighting and security systems. A small research area where visitors could learn about the historical significance of the collection. "A museum," Eleanor breathed, studying the detailed specifications. "The Grace Whitmore Memorial Collection," Michael said, "if you want it. I know I don't have the right to assume you'd want my help with anything, but I hoped maybe I could use my skills to build something that honored what I tried to destroy." Sarah leaned forward, her nurse's training evident in how carefully she watched Eleanor's reactions. "I've been researching grants for small historical museums. There's funding available for preserving local history, especially when it involves immigrant families and their contributions to Maine communities. And I've been digitizing everything," Tommy added, opening his laptop with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered his calling. "All the family photos, documents, stories that great-great-grandma Grace left. I'm creating an interactive timeline that people can explore online or on tablets in the museum." Eleanor looked around the room at her family, these people who'd wounded her so deeply 6 months ago, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not just remorse, but genuine understanding. Tommy's project represented hours of careful work, scanning fragile photographs and transcribing faded letters. Sarah's research showed real commitment to making amends through action rather than just words. And Michael's plans. The detail and thought evident in every line suggested months of careful consideration. "There's something else," Michael said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been meeting with Detective Bouchard and Amanda Cross about the pieces that are still missing. The ones that went overseas. I kept records, not good ones, but enough to trace some of the sales. I'm working with them to contact international authorities, see if anything can still be recovered." Jasper appeared in the doorway, carrying the tea service on Grace's silver tray. The sight of him moving so comfortably through her home, treating her treasures with the reverence they deserved, reminded Eleanor of how much her life had changed since that devastating day in April. "And what about the rest of your life, Michael?" Eleanor asked as Jasper began serving tea. "What happens to you and Lisa and the kids?" Michael's face darkened. "Lisa filed for divorce last month. She's taking the kids to her sisters in Arizona. She says Maine holds too many bad memories now, that she can't trust me to make good decisions anymore." His voice cracked. "She's not wrong." "Dad," Tommy said softly, "tell Grandma about the job." "It's nothing fancy," Michael said quickly. "Restoration work for an outfit in Portsmouth. Historic homes, old buildings that need careful attention to preserve their original character. The pay's terrible compared to what I was making, but—" He gestured toward Grace's writing desk. "I'm learning about the difference between building new things and preserving old ones. About why the old things matter." Eleanor sipped her tea, tasting the familiar blend that Grace had favored. Around her, the room hummed with the quiet energy of family stories preserved and honored. Tommy's laptop displayed a photograph of Grace as a young woman, her face bright with the determination that had carried her through the Great Depression and World War II. "Sarah," Eleanor said, "what about your children? How do they feel about Mommy moving across the country to make amends with Grandma?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "They're angry, confused. They don't understand why Daddy did something wrong to Grandma or why Mommy had to leave California to fix it. Emma's been acting out at school, and the boys keep asking when we're coming home." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But I realize that if I don't teach them about family responsibility, about making things right when you've done wrong, what kind of mother am I? What kind of people will they become?" "It's been hard," Sarah continued, "learning to be a single mother again, starting over in a new state. But I needed to be here. I needed to understand what we almost lost, what we almost threw away." Eleanor stood slowly and walked to Grace's writing desk. From one of its small drawers, she withdrew a leather-bound journal, one of the few items that had never left the house, that Michael and Sarah had somehow overlooked in their haste to liquidate her life. She returned to her chair and opened it carefully. "Grace kept a journal during the last year of her life," Eleanor said. "She wrote about each piece in her collection, about why it mattered, about the stories she wanted preserved. She found the page she was looking for. Listen to this. I pray that Ellie will understand that these objects are not just things to be owned, but stories to be shared. I hope that someday, when I'm gone, she'll find a way to let others learn from what our family has preserved. The young people especially, they need to know that history isn't just dates and books. It's the accumulation of individual lives, individual choices, individual loves." The room fell silent, except for the gentle ticking of Grace's mantel clock. Eleanor looked at each family member in turn. Tommy with his laptop full of digitized memories, Sarah with her research on museum funding, Michael with his carefully drawn plans for preservation and display. "Grace dreamed of sharing these stories," Eleanor said. "She just never imagined her great-great-grandson would be the one to make it possible, or that the son who scattered her treasures would be the one to design their permanent home." Michael's face was wet with tears now. "Does that mean— do you think you could forgive me?" Not forget. I know I don't deserve that. But maybe forgive enough to let me help fix what I broke? Eleanor thought of the past 6 months. The harassment. Calls that had finally stopped. The pieces recovered through patient negotiation and legal pressure. The unexpected love that had bloomed between her and Jasper. The way Tommy's enthusiasm for family history had reminded her that the future could honor the past without being trapped by it. I think, she said carefully, that Grace would want her collection to bring the family together, not tear it apart. She believed in redemption through understanding, in healing through shared purpose. She stood again and walked to where Michael sat hunched in his chair, this broken man who'd once been her confident, stubborn son. When she placed her hand on his shoulder, he looked up with the face of the boy he'd once been, the child who'd cried when he accidentally broke her favorite vase, who'd spent his allowance to buy her a replacement, even though it wasn't nearly as nice. I forgive you, Eleanor said. But more than that, I'm proud of the work you've done to understand what you did wrong. I'm proud of these plans, of the way you're trying to rebuild not just my trust, but your own integrity. Michael sobbed then, the deep, wrenching sobs of someone releasing months of guilt and shame. Sarah moved to sit beside him, wrapping her arms around her older brother the way she had when they were children. Tommy quietly closed his laptop and joined them, this teenager who'd become the bridge between generations. Jasper caught Eleanor's eye and smiled, his expression full of love and admiration for the woman who could find healing even in the deepest betrayal. He raised his teacup in a small salute to Grace's portrait on the mantel, acknowledging the wise woman whose values had ultimately guided her family back to each other. So, Eleanor said, settling back into her chair as her children composed themselves, when do we start building this museum? The afternoon light was fading when they finally finished planning. Michael would begin the renovation work in November, volunteering his time and expertise as part of his ongoing amends. Sarah would handle the grant applications and coordinate with local historical societies. Tommy would continue his digital archive project, expanding it to include oral histories from other longtime Camden families. And Eleanor would do what Grace had always done. She would tell the stories, preserve the memories, and ensure that the voices of the past continued to speak to future generations. As her family prepared to leave, Eleanor felt a presence she hadn't experienced since that terrible day in April. Grace's spirit seemed to fill the room, not with judgment or disappointment, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose deepest hopes had finally been realized. The collection would survive. The stories would be shared. The family would heal. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything Grace had ever wanted. 1 year. One full revolution of seasons since that devastating April morning when Eleanor had returned from grocery shopping to find her life being sold for pennies on the dollar. Now, on this crisp October afternoon, she stood before the brass plaque beside her front door that read, "The Grace Whitmore Memorial Collection, preserving 5 generations of Camden history," and marveled at how completely everything had changed. The Victorian house looked much the same from the outside, but the small parking area Michael had thoughtfully designed along the side accommodated the steady stream of visitors who'd been coming since word spread about the unique family museum. Today was special, though, the official grand opening celebration that would mark the transformation of a private tragedy into a public treasure. Eleanor smoothed her navy dress, the same one she'd worn to Harold's funeral 4 years ago, but which now felt like celebration rather than mourning. Through the front windows, she could see the warm glow of the museum's lighting illuminating Grace's carefully arranged collection. Not everything had come home. Perhaps 70% of the original pieces had been recovered through patient negotiation, legal pressure, and Detective Ray's persistent international inquiries. But what remained was enough to tell the story Grace had always wanted preserved. Ready for your big day? Jasper appeared at her side, looking distinguished in his best suit, and the bow tie that made him seem like the history professor he'd once been. At 73, he moved with the careful dignity of a man who'd found unexpected love in the autumn of his life. "I keep thinking Grace would have loved this," Eleanor said, accepting his offered arm. All the fuss, all the attention to her. Treasures. She was always a bit of a showwoman. "She would have been proud," Jasper agreed. "Not just of the collection, but of what you've accomplished, how you turned betrayal into healing, loss into legacy." The first guests were already arriving. Eleanor recognized several members of the Camden Historical Society, along with Amanda Cross, who'd become not just a professional ally, but a genuine friend over the past year. Amanda approached with a warm smile, carrying a small wrapped package. "Eleanor, this place looks absolutely magnificent. Michael's work on the lighting and display cases is museum quality." Amanda's enthusiasm was infectious. "I brought you something. A small token for the opening." Eleanor unwrapped the package to reveal a delicate glass paperweight containing a pressed 4-leaf clover. "It's lovely, Amanda, but you didn't need—" "It's not just any 4-leaf clover," Amanda interrupted gently. "It's from your front yard. I pressed it the day we first met, when I came to appraise the collection after the auction house incident. I thought you might like to have a piece of where this all began." The gesture brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. So many people had entered her life through this crisis, transforming what could have been a story of loss into something rich with new connections and purposes. Detective Ray approached, looking relaxed in civilian clothes for once. "Eleanor, I wanted you to know, we got word yesterday from Interpol. They've located Grace's silver tea service in a private collection in Switzerland. The collector is willing to return it once the paperwork's processed." "After all this time?" Eleanor could hardly believe it. "The publicity from your case has made a lot of collectors nervous about pieces with questionable provenance. Your story has helped more families than just your own." Sarah emerged from inside the house, her cheeks flushed with excitement. She'd been arranging the final displays all morning, her organizational skills as a nurse translating perfectly to museum curation. "Mom, you need to see what Tommy's done with the digital archive. He's got it set up so visitors can trace family stories through interactive timelines." They moved inside together, and Eleanor gasped at the transformation. Michael's renovation work had been masterful. The formal dining room now housed climate-controlled display cases that showcased Grace's collection while maintaining the room's Victorian character. Proper museum lighting brought out the rich colors of the Canton china and the intricate carving of the furniture pieces. But it was Tommy's corner that truly took her breath away. The 16-year-old had created a multimedia experience that brought 5 generations of family history to life. Visitors could touch screens to explore digitized photographs, read letters, and listen to recorded stories Eleanor had shared about each piece in the collection. "Look at this, Grandma," Tommy said, his voice bright with pride as he demonstrated the system. "You can click on any photograph and hear the story behind it. And here," he pulled up a timeline showing the family's immigration from Ireland. "People can trace how American history affected individual families, see how big events played out in ordinary lives." A small crowd was gathering around Tommy's display, fascinated by the technology and the stories it revealed. Eleanor watched, a young mother explaining to her daughter how the family had survived the Great Depression, using Grace's collection as tangible proof that difficult times could be endured. "Mrs. Whitmore?" A teenage girl approached hesitantly. "I'm doing a report for school about local immigrant families. Tommy said you might have time to talk about your great-grandmother?" Eleanor looked at the girl's eager face and felt Grace's presence. So strongly it was almost physical. This was what her grandmother had dreamed of. Young people connecting with history, understanding that the past was made up of real people who'd faced real challenges with courage and determination. "I'd be delighted," Eleanor said. Her name was Grace O'Sullivan when she arrived from County Cork in 1923. As Eleanor told Grace's story, more people gathered around. She found herself slipping naturally into the role of storyteller, bringing to life the young woman who'd crossed an ocean with nothing but determination and a few precious family heirlooms. The audience listened with rapt attention as she described Grace's struggles during the Depression, her work in the local textile mill, her patient accumulation of beautiful objects that reminded her of home. Michael appeared at the edge of the crowd, and Eleanor felt her heart lift at the sight of him. The haunted look that had shadowed his face for months was gone, replaced by something she hadn't seen since he was a boy: genuine pride in work well done. His restoration skills had found new purpose in preservation rather than demolition, and the museum was a testament to his transformation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Michael called out, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who'd rebuilt himself from the ground up. "If I could have your attention for just a moment, I'd like to say something about my mother and what she's accomplished here." The room quieted, and Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. Michael's relationship with public speaking had always been complicated, but something in his bearing suggested this was important to him. "A year ago, I made the worst mistake of my life," Michael began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I betrayed my mother's trust and nearly destroyed something irreplaceable. I sold these treasures, our family's history, because I couldn't see past my own problems to understand what they really meant." Eleanor reached for Jasper's hand, needing the comfort of his steady presence as her son laid bare his failures before a room full of strangers. "But my mother did something I never expected," Michael continued. "She forgave me. Not just forgave, she gave me the chance to help rebuild what I'd broken. Every display case in this room, every carefully positioned light, every security system, it's all part of my attempt to honor what I tried to destroy." His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "The Grace Whitmore Memorial Collection isn't just about preserving old things. It's about understanding that our mistakes don't have to define us if we're willing to do the hard work of making amends. It's about the power of family to heal even the deepest wounds." The room was completely silent now, everyone absorbed in this unexpected moment of raw honesty. "Mom," Michael said, looking directly at Eleanor, "I know I can never fully repay what you lost because of my actions, but I promise you this: for the rest of my life, I'll work to preserve what you've built here. Grace's stories will be told, her collection will be protected, and maybe someday I'll be worthy of the forgiveness you've given me." Spontaneous applause broke out, but Eleanor barely heard it. She was looking at her son, really looking at him, and seeing not the broken man who'd lost everything, but someone who'd found his way back to the values she and Harold had tried to instill decades ago. As the afternoon continued, Eleanor moved through the house like a ship through familiar waters, sharing stories and answering questions. Each conversation reinforced her sense that Grace's dream was being fulfilled in ways her grandmother could never have imagined. The collection wasn't just preserved, it was alive, sparking connections between past and present, inspiring young people to value their own family histories. Sarah found her in the quiet of the late afternoon as the last visitors were saying their goodbyes. "Mom, I have something for you." She handed Eleanor a leather portfolio. "It's the grant application for permanent status as a historical site. If it's approved, the state will provide ongoing funding for maintenance and expansion." Eleanor opened the portfolio to find beautifully prepared documentation featuring photographs of the collection, testimonials from visitors, and a detailed proposal for educational programming. "Sarah, this is incredible work. I had help from the Historical Society and Amanda's contacts in the museum world. But Mom, the best part is the community support. We've got letters from schools wanting to bring students here, from genealogy groups, from other families who want to preserve their own histories." As evening fell, the immediate family gathered in the kitchen for a quiet dinner. Tommy showed off his latest additions to the digital archive, including oral histories he'd recorded with elderly Camden residents about their own immigrant families. Sarah shared stories from her work at the hospital, where she'd been inspired to start a program collecting medical histories from longtime local families. Michael talked about his restoration work on other historic homes, how understanding the importance of preservation had given his career new meaning, but it was Jasper who provided the evening's most significant moment. As they were clearing dishes, he stood and cleared his throat with the nervous energy of a man about to take a significant risk. "Eleanor," he began, his usually steady voice, trembling slightly. "I have something I'd like to say. Something I'd like to ask, actually." Eleanor felt her heart skip as Jasper pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Around the table, her family went perfectly still. "I know we're both in the autumn of our lives," Jasper continued, "and I know that neither of us expected to find love again. But this year, watching you fight for your family's legacy, watching you forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible, watching you build something beautiful from something broken, well, it's reminded me that it's never too late for new beginnings." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold ring set with a small but perfectly cut sapphire. This was my grandmother's ring. Like Grace's things, it carries stories. Stories of love that endured, of commitment that lasted through difficult times. "Eleanor Whitmore, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The kitchen was so quiet, Eleanor could hear the old house settling around them, the familiar creaks and sighs of home. She looked at this kind, patient man who'd entered her life during its darkest moment and helped her find her way back to light. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Jasper McGillicuddy, I will marry you." As her family erupted in celebration around them, Eleanor felt Grace's presence one final time, not as a spirit haunting the edges of her consciousness, but as a warm blessing settling over the scene. Her grandmother's greatest dream had been realized. The family was whole, the stories were preserved, and love had triumphed over loss. Later that evening, after the dishes were done and her family had gone home, Eleanor and Jasper sat in Grace's parlor surrounded by the recovered treasures. The museum was quiet now, but tomorrow would bring new visitors, new stories, new connections, between past and present. Eleanor opened Grace's jewelry box and withdrew the Civil War locket that had started everything, the piece whose recovery had exposed the auction house's practices and launched her transformation from victim to victor. Inside were the tiny photographs that had survived more than a century, faces that had weathered wars and depressions, celebrations and sorrows, always maintaining their gentle watch over the generations that followed. "Do you think she'd approve?" Eleanor asked, showing Jasper the ancient faces in the locket. "I think," Jasper said, pulling Eleanor close, "that Grace would be amazed by what you've accomplished. You didn't just preserve her collection, you preserved the idea that families can heal, that love can overcome betrayal, that ordinary people can create extraordinary legacies." Outside, the October wind rustled through the maple trees that had shaded this house for more than a century. Inside, surrounded by 5 generations of carefully preserved memories, Eleanor felt the deep satisfaction of promises kept and dreams fulfilled. The scattered inheritance had been gathered, the broken family had been healed, the stories would live on. Grace Whitmore's legacy was secure, but more than that, it was growing, touching new lives, inspiring new generations to value the connections that bind past to present, to future. It was everything Eleanor had fought for, everything she dared to hope for, and everything Grace had dreamed of when she'd made her granddaughter promise to preserve the family's treasures. The circle was complete. The story would continue. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.